Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm José.
And today we're talking about O Fantasma.
Yes.
Which is Portuguese.
Yes.
In English the title would be The Phantom or The Ghost.
Yes, though, I'm not quite sure I agree with those translations. I mean, I think literally yes. But I think it also means like fantasies, desires, okay. It has that kind of a connotation to me anyway. I mean, I'm a Spanish speaker and I grew up with Portuguese people, so I can understand, the language very well, but I'm not kind of so fluent in it that I could translate these terms specifically. But, it just has those it has those connotations of desires and fantasy, and, in so many ways that's what the film is about. So. Yeah.
So the film is from the year 2000, nearly 20 years old now.
I know, and actually that's something that made me think, because, it's one of those films that I've been meaning to see forever. It never came my way. I mean, gay cinema is, at least, in my own head, is one of my specialisms. I try to keep up. I try to kind of see whatever is out there. And this is one of those films that you heard about and that people had talked to you about as something I should see. But actually, I've never had the opportunity until now, where we just saw it on MUBI, right? So, but also I wonder what took me so long. Why didn't I, order the DVD or something, right? Like, it's kind of, it's really shocking that it's 20 years old. I thought it was more like, from 4 or 5 years ago or something, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, films from that long ago feel like they're still from yesterday, though, in a way. Because after this, we're going to go and see The Matrix, which has got this 4K restoration. And I was saying to you before how I'm 30 years old, and so this is a film that I saw when I was a kid, The Matrix, and it's weird to me that I'm now old enough for a film that I saw when I was a kid to have a restoration.
Yes, my God, well...
That's 20 years old.
Yes. So you'll be used to that. You'll be more and more used to that sensation as time goes on.
It's, as I said, it's Portuguese. It's directed by João Pedro Rodrigues.
Yes.
And written by Alexandre Melo and José Neves.
Yes. I'm very curious to know what you think about it. I mean, just my cards up front, I think it's absolutely great. And I will tell you why.
I didn't think it was absolutely great. I found it fairly unfocused. And I suppose I can't be too critical of it in that respect, because the clue's in the title that this guy is kind of he lives sort of, he flips in and out of life. That's how the film kind of works as one of those films, as a series of like moments and scenes.
Yes.
They're not vignettes, right? There is a plot and there is a story, but it's not heavily plot driven. It's about the atmosphere of what's happening and the feeling of
very much so. But that's not a fault.
No, it's not a fault. I'm just saying, like, this is. I should. It's harsh for me to criticise it for that, but it did feel unfocused to me. I would have liked. I wanted more definition of the character's context and background. So the main character is played by Ricardo Meneses, and he's called Sergio, and he's young.
Sergio?
Yeah. Well, according to the Wikipedia page.
Okay.
I don't think it's possible they don't actually name him in the film.
Yeah. Okay.
Because there's not a lot of. It's not that talky.
Right.
So maybe no one actually calls him by name, but.
Okay. Yeah.
Anyway, he's young. He's sort of
extremely handsome.
Very good-looking kid. He's a garbage collector. Doing like night shifts and early morning shifts, going around the city, Lisbon, picking up trash, and he's also. Gay. I think he seems to be kind of. I don't think it's like a crisis of sexuality. Really. He's not discovering himself. He seems to be very sure about who he is early on, I think.
Yes, though we're not sure at exactly the beginning. So first of all, I think the film has the feeling of a kind of a feverish sex dream. It's like a, it's like a reverie. It's kind of. It made me think of those times, when I was younger, and all of a sudden you get horny and you're up for sex and and it's kind of like, in a way, like all bets are off. Yeah, it's kind of like, a sexual space that's a kind of, almost like a dream space. Yeah, but it's like a sexual space, and sometimes one in which you find yourself doing crazy things. right? And kind of the film is full of imagery like that of, this guy, not out of control, but just in a different sphere. So, for example, that incredible shot where, he just takes his clothes off in a public pool. He goes into a public pool when it's closed. He takes off his clothes off, and he gets on the line and kind of, just abandons himself, right? It's kind of, so it's almost like a feeling of just horniness, of being up for it, but having no one with which to do anything with, right? And putting himself in all kinds of, like, dangerous situations, as a means of, like, finding that kind of release, that he's looking for. So I think if you see the film that way, it kind of makes a different kind of sense, because the film, I think, is all up that. Like, this guy is just, it's horny, he's up for it. The film also has a kind of, it has a whole thing about dogs, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so there are dogs all over the film. The film begins with this image of this guy handcuffed and getting fucked by a guy in a rubber suit whom you don't know who it is at that point, but also with the suit open at the crack of his ass. Yeah, which is kind of like a weird image, because on the one hand, he's fucking the guy, which implies kind of one thing, and the guy is handcuffed, which also implies something, the guy he's fucking, and yet on the other hand, his ass is open for business. Like, so it's kind of like a very intriguing image. And there's a Doberman at the door, pawing away, right? So that kind of, I suppose the beauty of that animal, but also the dangerousness of it, right? Yeah. And with that weird kind of disjunctive, slightly mechanical music, I think there's a whole thing to be done on the sound in this film, really, because, so in that first image, you hear, like, the sound of the city, of planes, of clanking. It's slightly electronic and mechanical and distorted, right? Which I think kind of sets a tone for the film. And then the whole thing about dogs, right? So, they're sniffing each other. He's licking. He's
right at the start. He has a dog, and right at the start, he feeds the dog. He gives the dog a bone, and he gets down on his hands and knees with the dog.
Yes.
And starts kind of behaving like a dog. And then the girl comes in. This girl, Fatima, who kind of famishes for him, and then I don't know exactly what happens, but he ends up sort of licking her hand and on the floor whimpering. Yes. Like a dog,
yes.
And there's something very animalistic about him. He kind of, I think, seems to see the world or interact with the world through simple desires and kind of interpreting the way he sees what people want, the way he behaves with them is all very simple and kind of animalistic, and it's down with it seems to be related to base desire. Yes,
it's very base, and it's very significant that it's a dog that's he is shown to have affinities with and so on, because there's an expression in Spanish, and I think it's the same in Portuguese, when somebody who's who responds to their sexuality, who's kind of, they call them, and especially gay men do this, que perra, which means, like, it's not a whore and it's not a bitch, but it's just someone who does what they want with their body, right? Like, who behaves like an animal, like a bitch in heat, right? Like, and there is, like, an element in this film, like, this guy's like a bitch in heat, right? And not knowing what to do with himself, like, kind of, and kind of.
But he allows himself to respond to all his desires. He doesn't ever stop himself from doing anything.
That's right. He's got no filter, and he's got no fear. Which I think is quite extraordinary to see in the film. He's absolutely got no fear. Right. So he meets everybody's glance, including the policeman when those guys come to him. I thought there's a kind of a fearlessness that it kind of indicates also a dare, like, where is this going? I'm not afraid of you, and this could get sexual if you want it to, right? Which I think was like quite extraordinary for me to see.
The scene right at the start where he's walking his dog and they come across this car, and in the back he notices there's this cop that's tied up.
Yes.
But you don't know why this cop's there. I don't think it's completely free of context.
That's right.
In the back seat of a car, having been tied up and gagged.
There are things that happen in the city at night.
And then, and I guess, you would think he would maybe try and help or ask the guy what happened or something. But what he does is he puts his hands all over his body and then starts jerking him off.
Yes.
I think there's something in that about, like, cops being, to the gay community, some of the worst antagonists. You talk about kind of coming here to Coventry 30 years ago and how cops would come into pubs.
No, that was in Montreal.
Oh, was that in Montreal? Sorry.
Yeah.
Cops would come into clubs just to intimidate you.
Yeah.
And the idea of that kind of being turned on its head here, that the cop is already bound and gagged and this guy can do what he likes to him.
But that's doubled because, I think one of the things about oppressed minorities in general, but particularly sexual ones like gay men, is that there's also a fetishization of the oppressor. So, the cop figure, was a real kind of oppressor. But on the other hand, but it's turned by Tom of Finland into a kind of a fetish sexual figure, right? So you have that in this film as well. That kind of, all of the figures of authority become also potently sexualized.
There seems to be something very defiant about that to me.
Yes.
And I think actually, I mean, you said halfway through, I didn't expect it to be so explicit. And it is, and you see blowjobs, see the guys naked all the time.
The guy's naked all the time. It's a real queer gaze, really, like a real gay male gaze, actually, on the action, which I think is lovely to see and much more unusual. It seems like unfiltered.
I think for the era that might not be that unusual. I don't know about Portuguese cinema particularly, or Portuguese culture particularly, but this was around the time of the sort of new French extremity, right? The kind of early 2000s.
I suppose so. Yes, that's an interesting thought. It's 10 years after New Queer Cinema, and even New Queer Cinema was not sexually explicit in the way that this is. I mean, you see a hard-on and you see the guy wanking, really, so I suppose, so I think the New French Extremity, like, in tone, is completely the opposite of this. That had like a harsh kind of crudeness, whereas actually this is very stylized, this film, I think.
Yeah.
So I think I found it unusual, and I think I found it kind of really beautiful. The images, I think, are extraordinary, and I think even the way that the film proceeds, because it proceeds as kind of like one fantasy against another, and it's kind of unfiltered, really, and by that I mean that, the film basically culminates in a kind of rape. So, this guy is obsessed with this straight motorcyclist, tries to pick him up, stalks him at his house, pees all over his bed like a dog would, marking his territory, but none of that works, really. And basically he then kind of kidnaps him, right? And it feels like a kind of a fantasy in which, even a rape fantasy is unfiltered, right? And actually it's kind of very interesting because those things trail off, like they do in kind of sexual dreams or something, right? So in a way that's kind of what you were saying, that it's not cohesive, but I think it is coherent. Yeah, so in terms of, if you look at it only in terms of plot, then obviously no, things come and go and they trail off, but I think it's kind of coherent in terms of tone and feeling, and kind of as an exploration of, a set of desires that almost increase and kind of explode, really, and that are quite transgressive, really. So he's thought to be the girlfriend of this guy. He tells the girlfriend that his fantasy is to have their boss fucking her, to see her being fucked by his boss. In fact, the boss is fucking her. But actually what we found out is that the boss is also fucking him, right? Yeah. And in a way that hurts him. Yeah, so, kind of, so there's there's both a kind of a sadomasochistic element to it, yes, and there's also a kind of, there's a masochistic element to it, and there's also a sadistic element to it, i.e., something like the rape, right?
Yeah.
So it's almost like the film is showing you like a full gamut of, various fantasies and desires that kind of seem to be lived by this character almost in a 24-hour period. The feeling the film has a feeling, because it goes into the night, and then kind of ends up in the daytime, right?
Yeah.
And it's very animalistic, so kind of at the end of the film, where you have like this figure that is kind of like we were saying, like Venom.
He's dressed in this latex suit, and including a mask that covers his
mask,
head.
Wandering the city, right? And what is he looking for, or what is he escaping, right? Like,
and he doesn't walk like he doesn't walk upright. He kind of lumbers. He's hunched as he does that.
Yeah,
with his
and there's
out.
Images that I think are just really potent and poetic and beautiful, because kind of. The thing is that he's got all these desires in a culture in which he's allowed none of them, right? So there's that image where the police handcuff him, but then leave him handcuffed, and he tries to escape his handcuffs, and then you have him running in this beautifully composed image where half the frame, it's like this tunnel, but it's composed, of blocks, that create this design, and he's running handcuffed from the back. Across these spaces. I just thought that was like beautiful, and suggestive. And then you have that, in contrast to, these images of him wandering the city in this rubber suit. The rubber suit is glistening, right? But as the day comes on, the image becomes harsher and harsher, right? So there's something kind of beautiful and shiny. It's like this bit of glittering light in the darkness that he represents, when it's dark. But then as the light comes on, you see the crudeness and of the landscape, and he ends up at a garbage dump, right? Drinking water that he knows will make him ill, and he's ill, right? And kind of, and eating, and then he ends up shitting, and it's kind of
dragging a rabbit around by the ears, which I think you can tell is a real rabbit, and that's harsh.
Yes.
The rabbit's sort of twitching.
Yes. So I just think it's like fantastic.
Do you think there is a way of looking at it in that is less positive in its representation of gay people or gay sort of society, in that I got the feeling that you could look at it as sort of the world of the gay world is a kind of depraved one. I think you could see that as he kind of as he indulges more and more of his sort of fantasies or desires, his behaviour becomes worse, and that transgression becomes worse, and the kind of it sinks into night more, that sort of thing. Do you think there's a way of looking at it like that is it's kind of demonising?
Well, I mean, I think it depends. A lot of those things will depend on who's watching it. I definitely do not think it's demonizing. I think it's celebrating. I think it's kind of celebrating the variety of desires. I mean, that's part of what being a perra, or being like an animal, or behaving like an animal in that sense, is that you act on your desires, right? That you're not censoring them. Now, obviously you could say kind of, certain censors are necessary if you want to function in society, right? But a lot of those kind of censors are kind of socially imposed, as a way of shaming you or making you feel bad for who you are, right? And I think kind of the thing that's wonderful about the film is that it shows that too, right?
Yeah.
But I think there's something kind of radiant and subversive and defiant about, Sergio's glance, and looking back. And I think, one of the great things about living in the moment that we do, this film would never have been made, like, pre-digital, really, kind of. You can only make a film like this because it's cheap to make, and because there's a niche audience for it.
Was it shot digitally? Do you know?
I'm not sure, actually.
I don't know, myself.
But whether it was or not, kind of, is less important to me than the fact that, the coming on of digital decreased costs.
Yeah, sure.
And also kind of new equipment and recording and cameras and so on. It made films cheaper. Yeah. So I think, this is a film, that could only have been made in the moment that it was made, and perhaps now, right, but not before. And also because you have a niche market through, first VHS and then DVDs, the kind of, small budget films can be made for a niche audience. And also that,
and the more that they are made, the more the more you can expect them to be made.
Exactly.
When other people are making them, you can expect yours to be made too.
But also in terms of what we were talking about borders yesterday, this is a film where Alexandre Astruc's notion of the camera stylo, that you could write with a camera like you could with a pen. I think we're living in a moment where that's literally true, in the sense that you can make really, really personal films about. It could be like a kind of an autobiographical novella about your desires, right? It could be like a kind of a Jeanette-esque fantasy that you're writing. You can now do that. It's a very personal film. It's about sexual fantasies, right? It's kind of So it's not like a blockbuster kind of narrative for the masses, right? Do you know what I mean?
Yes. I do.
Yeah. So the difference between a literary novella or something. Or
Tom Clancy.
Or Tom Clancy. Yeah, exactly. Right. So this is that type of thing, and it can be done for a niche audience, really. And I thought it was just amazing, and I'm very curious to see if he's done anything else.
Do you think there's something sad about the main character? We've spoken before about the idea of gay characters being lonely.
Yes.
And although he doesn't we talk. If you remember Bohemian Rhapsody, there's that whole thing about him pining for the woman, and there's nothing like that in this. He doesn't pine for anyone. Really. Well, I suppose he pines in a sense for the motorcyclist. He stalks him.
Yes, my God. And he's so starved,
But he doesn't have a connection with anyone,
Well, he doesn't find one yet. It's true. But actually, the thing that I love about this film is that it's open to all the possibilities. That he's not ashamed of who he is or what he wants, right? So it's clear that he's not finding what he wants, right? Because what you see throughout is like a hunger, and it's almost like the definition of desire. Desire is always that which remains always unobtainable, right? Yeah, it's always out of reach, right? So kind of, what you see is kind of like this guy's desires in operation and kind of, in changing and so on, right? And you literally see that hunger, that licking of the bathroom wall, right? Like, so, now...
Well, I suppose that's what I was getting at when I said that early on I wanted more definition to him. I feel like I was missing definition to what he wanted as opposed to how he wanted.
Well, what he wants is sex. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Right? And actually, this is what I was saying. It kind of, reminded me of sometimes my feeling, when you're a young man, it's like kind of it's almost like, I don't know, your temperature would rise or something. Like all of a sudden you were horny and you didn't know what to do with yourself, right? Like, which sometimes led to kind of things that were difficult to explain. Like, you'd go clubbing in Coventry and wake up in Manchester somehow, right?
Yeah.
And you think, you wake up the next morning, you think, what the fuck did I do? Like, as soon as like, kind of, your desire is fulfilled, then all of a sudden it's like you feel the guilt and remorse, and how did I end up here?
Yeah. The moment of clarity.
Yeah, but in that moment where you're just like high on desire or buoyed by desire or looking for release, it's like it occupies a different mental space, really. And I think the film is all about that particular mental space.
It is, but I think it kind of leaves him in a place where he's lost. That final shot of him running out the door and looking left, looking right, and not really knowing where to
being
go.
Being hunted, yes.
Yeah. He ends up lost and it's not. I don't think it's a happy ending.
No.
If I can use that phrase.
No, and I'm not sure that the film is celebratory of it. And I think it's clear that it's a very homophobic place he is inhabiting, right? Like, it's all glances and toilets and
if you look at the wrong guy the wrong way,
you'll get beaten up.
Exactly.
Yeah, but that's the reality of most people. I mean, look what's happening in Poland and so on. Right, so, and what I love about the film is it doesn't negate any of that. And also, it's a film that if you had some right-wing homophobic Pole look at it, it would absolutely fulfill every single one of his prejudices about gay people.
Yeah,
There's
you could just list what happens in every scene and just print it in the Daily Mail and go horrible, crude.
Exactly, right? You know, so it's definitely, but that's what I think makes the film A, so subversive, and B, so great that it exists and that it's so poetic with what it does. Yeah, because I think it's a film full of freedom, really.
Mm. But if you were the Daily Mail reader, you might look at it and go, well, this is a guy encased by his desires and able to do it.
We have to get rid of this, what will the Daily Mail say?
I'm not saying it in... I'm offering that slightly different reading that says there is a different interpretations.
Well,
I mean, I think towards the end of the film, when he's in this latex suit, there's, you know, it's something it's extraordinarily restrictive about that, and he's kind of he's behind sort of chain link fences and things.
Yes,
you know, and that's imagery that struck me as kind of someone who's trying to break out, but there's a kind of imprisonment.
He's being contained.
Yeah.
So you know, the suit is both a fetish, you know, but the fetish of the suit is that of containment, of having the body kind of contained, and having it sweat and having it restrained and, you know, having it hemmed in, right? Like, you know, I mean, kind of, you know, kind of people use talcum powder to get into it, and, you know, and so on. So, yeah, I mean, it's so tight that, you know, but again, I think that's like an incredibly potent image. Mm. You know, kind of this man in a rubber suit, kind of, you know, running through all the sewers and dumps and, you know, alleyways of Lisbon. Yeah, kind of, yeah, like on the one hand, he's everywhere, he's invisible, he's oppressed, but also he's kind of hunted and on the hunt, right? I mean, there's
something too that is like, it's not where he would ideally be, and I know we're talking about sort of this is where society, you could say this is where society has forced him to, you know, this kind of being on the run, and the only way he can sort of live out his desires leads him to here because of the constraints that society puts on him.
Yes, but also I think there's this feeling that, you know, I mean, so much about kind of and rightly, but so much of the coverage in the media about gays and lesbians now has been about assimilation, right? About getting married and being like everybody else, right? And this is a film that also asserts a kind of a radical difference, right? Kind of, yeah. He doesn't want what everybody else wants. I mean, you know, or at least not at this point in his life. Yeah, kind of, you know, at this point in his life, he's sniffing out sex. That's what he wants. Yeah, right. And he kind of makes himself vulnerable, you know, in a very brave way, in all kinds of different ways, in order to kind of fulfill that desire in a way that is very animalistic, but that nonetheless is also very human, I think.
Was it you who shared that article from maybe the New York Times about Pete Buttigieg? Is that how you pronounce his name? One of the U.S. Democratic presidential candidates, and how he's gay.
Oh yes,
but
maybe.
he's like really white bread. Like I mean, actually, before you shared that article, I didn't know he was gay. Yes. And the idea of the article is to say that like he is so assimilated that this is the only way that kind of being gay is kind of palatable.
Yes, and even then, it's not really palatable. So, but this film doesn't have any truck with that. It starts off as something very queer, really. Yeah, it's like, you know, dog-like. Perreo, like a bitch in heat, right? It's kind of or a dog in heat, a female dog in heat is, you know, the recurrent concept in the film. Yeah, and I think it's I think it's a great film. I think I might see it again.
It does. I did have a kind of brief look around, and I think it might be a sign of, you know, the time sort of 20 years ago, because this is where all these reviews come from, but deeply negative reviews from almost everybody.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm not.
They're all wrong.
Well, you know, they're very well might be, but I think that's, you know, talking about the context of the time. That's why it kind of struck me as something very, as you said, subversive, and I said defiant. You know, the kind of the explicitness. Like it would look you could make the same film today, but the context in which the film would kind of enter, you know, the context of the audience that would see it would be very different, because although it would remain very explicit and kind of shockingly so, I think there's kind of more acceptance of it, or people will be more willing to not kind of take against it immediately.
I'm not
as
sure.
They may have done back then.
I mean, I think this is a film that would probably cause a Twitter storm, right? And you could just imagine, like, rape, like no black people,
yeah,
you know, like all kinds of.
Doesn't represent enough people.
Yeah, it could be all kinds of things, but you know,
it does strike me as a film that is very much a product of the context of its time. It seems to me.
Well, but I think for me, seeing it now, I think it's one of the films that has spoken most directly to me as a sexual being with a sexual history.
Yeah.
You know, that I have very rarely seen that kind of representation of, like, you know, desire, right? Like, what desire is or can be, you know, for at least a certain kind of gay man, you know, particularly, young, maybe in the closet or on the verge of coming out, and, you know, with a very kind of in a very homophobic culture or something, right? And how those things kind of get worked through in, you know, or they're embodied, right? Like what they feel like, in a kind of an embodied way. I think the film conveys that to me very palpably.
Yeah, there's no kind of need to talk anything through or explain yourself or think through your actions in this. Like, if we think about other kind of gay films that we've seen that we've really liked, like 120 Beats Per Minute and stuff, like they don't quite embody that just. They're all about talking about it.
Yes.
You know, and this is this guy's just. Why do we need to?
Yeah.
You know, just live it.
This isn't so much. I mean, it's a kind of story. It is a story, so there is storytelling involved. But I think it's about the conveyance of a certain kind of sexual dreamscape, of a certain kind of fantasy, of that kind of feeling, of you know, of horniness, really. So it kind of it operates and is structured differently, you know, than a conventional narrative. So things don't cohere in terms of a story, but they are coherent in terms of a fantasy or a dream feeling. And actually, I think that's what makes it so incredibly successful for me, and kind of rare.
Yeah, that's good.
All right, well, you can all watch it on MUBI. It's still got a few weeks to go. It's a rare opportunity, so I think particularly if you're gay and if you're a gay man interested in films, this is unmissable.
Yes, let me just double check how long it has left on MUBI. 16 days as we record this podcast will be out in a couple of days, so you've got 2 weeks left to watch it.
Yes. So you're welcome. We are eavesdropping at the movies, and we are on
iTunes, SoundCloud, and YouTube. On social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter, and the website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Thank you very much for listening.
Bye bye.